Excited again to be on this call and to be an encouragement to all of you. This is part two in a three-part series of answering questions from different groups of people. Last week was all about men in recovery of sexual addiction, and this week is the women who are struggling with addiction sexually and also love addiction. And so I have questions for them. Very interesting. We're going to hear some things for you in this morning's group with me. You're going to hear that the struggle is a lot the same, that they're facing the same kind of things. You also hear some distinctives as they carry almost, it seems like, a sense of more shame and more embarrassment for their addiction. So yeah, I'm excited to answer the questions that come from the women's group called Flare. And but really good questions that will be helpful to all of us here. And then next week following, we'll do a set of questions that I'll answer for partners of people who are living with someone who struggles with sexual addiction. And I've already got 13 of those questions, and more will come this week. And that'll be fabulous for us all to hear as we seek to understand some of the hurts and perspectives of those who are working through the issue of being a partner of someone who struggles with addiction. So let's go with these recovery questions from the Flare group. All right. Number one, my question is, when someone is classified as recovered, I see my addiction as a sin that continue calls me to he must increase, I must decrease. And essentially, aren't we all in this race forever, at least in a spiritual sense? So first of all, the person is quoting John chapter 3, and it's John the Baptist who says to his disciples when they ask, how come all those people are going to Jesus now? How come they're not coming to us? Because, you know, John's ministry was going down as Jesus was going up, but John had led the way. And that's when John said this famous line, he must increase and I must decrease. It's about him. And it's a beautiful principle in all of our lives that my self-will needs to decrease and his direction of my life needs to increase. So that's the passage there. So first of all, that particular phrase, he must increase, I must decrease, is a great phrase, true of all of us. I need to continue to trust God to work in my life in every way and become less about Dave and more about Jesus. So that's good. Yes, addiction is a sin, but it is also an addiction that is a behavioral, psychological, personal challenge that I must get over. And so we are in this race forever because, I mean, I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. That's 2 Timothy chapter 4, and we are all in this race of continuing to overcome sin in our life and surrender to Jesus and making a difference in this world. That being said, there's a difference between deliberate, willful sin, where I am choosing to embrace my addiction, where I'm consciously choosing to go back to it, as opposed to being tripped up, slipped up, whatever. If you're not learning, you're not growing, and you're not trusting Jesus, you're not reaching out to others, then you got to ask yourself, am I really working to get out of the addiction? What I do know is that people do get out of the addiction. I hear people say, look, I'm 600 days clean. I'm 1,200 days clean. I'm 2,000 days clean. And so it is possible. Will you always have temptation in the background? Sure. I believe we all will have those temptations, but you learn over time how to deal with them. And that's where I think we'll go with that question. Number two, when it comes to stopping the FMO cycle, FMO stands for fantasy, masturbation, orgasm. It's trying to stop that cycle. Is it okay to fantasize about your partner still, or daydream about that intimate time that you want with them? Well, first of all, understand why masturbation is off the table for any kind of recovering addicts, male or female. It's because the masturbation is so connected to the addiction that even if I'm not looking at pornography anymore or lusting after real people that I've seen today, I'm so tempted to go into the fantasy world, and the masturbation is completely connected to my addiction rather. And I need to fully accept that I need to get masturbation out of my life for a long enough season that it can be reinstated with the blessing of my spouse when needed, but not in a dominating, controlling thing. The other thing too is I think it's important if you are enjoying some fantasy about your spouse that is in a healthy direction, there should be no secrets. I need to be telling them, listen, I was thinking about you today, and it was pretty entertaining, whatever, but we have to discuss what that feels like to your spouse. And so yeah, so I would say that while you're still recovering the addiction, that we don't change from PMO to FMO to now spouse fantasy that just replaces the whole addiction cycle. Number 3, when you and a spouse are recovering from sexual addiction at the same time, do you have tips on being supportive, but also not feeling like a nag? Great question. Well, first of all, it's really important that you both have outside accountability partners, that you're not each other's accountability partners. That being, because that person needs to speak truth into your lives as recovering addicts. But you also need to have weekly reports where you check in with each other, tell each other how you're doing, what you're working on. And I would say that you need to keep a 5-to-1 ratio of encouragement to criticism. That means if I have something negative that I need to say to my spouse that might not be received too well, because they can jump into quickly while you're one to talk. But if I've encouraged them in things I've seen going well 5 times, then the one thing that I'm going to bring up won't be so hurtful to them, because they realize that the context of care and encouragement that they're bringing this thing up. And so, yeah, let the Holy Spirit and someone else be the cop in your spouse's life if you're both recovering addicts. Number 4, how do you navigate and talk to your children about the sexual addiction, the sexual betrayal, and the sexual recovery? Well, the greater the age, the more you're going to tell them. The younger they are, the less you're going to tell them. So, and sometimes you have to say something because there's an impact to them directly. Like if dad moves out for a while, or mom moves out for a while, or they separate for a while, or it's getting a little more permanent, at least for a couple of months or something, not just away for a few days in the heat of the moment of explosion, whatever. You can just explain to them in general sense about mom and dad are going through some tough times right now, pray for us, but as they get older, into their middle teen years and beyond, you may want to say that, and the wise person is the one who owns it to their kids, doesn't make the spouse tell the story. Of course, the spouse that's hurt wants to tell the story because it explains why we're in this mess. Now, obviously, there's other challenges in the marriage, likely not just this one, but this is the predominant one that's causing it. So be careful on telling little kids anything of this. The worst is just mom and daddy are having some problems right now, is all you want to tell them, and just ask them to pray for you, as opposed to something more when they're young. And as they get older, you don't need to necessarily tell the whole story, but that's something that you may want to talk as your kids get older, talk to a therapist about their best guidance on that one there. Number 5, at what age of the relationship do you think it's important to be honest about your sexual addiction, your sensual addiction, and your struggles? Example, before you start dating, 2 months into dating, 6 to 12 months of dating, when you're engaged. Using these parameters that was asked here, I think in the first 2 months of dating, I don't think you need to share that you have these struggles like in the first week or two, but certainly by the time you get to the end of you're already in your 6th or 7th or 8th date and you're starting to enjoy each other more, and looking like we're going to develop this thing, it's better to be honest, because you want them to love you for who you are and some of the baggage you've had to deal with. And also, this is a pinch point, because if you need to be honest with the person you're dating about your sexual addiction or your sensual addiction or love addiction and what you're doing about it, then it actually is a bit of a pinch point to say, I'm going to keep working on that to make sure. So I would say earlier in the relationship to be honest, and they have to make decisions there, and have a game plan about what you're doing with this. Don't just say, I've struggled with this and I still am, right? Number 6, with the desire to be a woman of integrity or a person of integrity, where do you draw the line in honest disclosure and speaking the truth versus wise boundaries on what is going to be shared? Wise boundaries, being a person of integrity, and honest disclosure. Well, what to tell and how much to tell is really the question. And I think that you know, if you have a thought flash that you don't go with, and you know, you see someone that's a distraction to you and a temptation, you may want to talk to your accountability partner about that. But if you don't go anywhere with that, right, you know, you would likely just deal with that with your accountability partner, because there was a few times this week I was tempted, but I reached out and I called a friend, I prayed, and I dealt with it, because we need to continue to honestly deal with temptation. We got to be careful too on you know, citing a person that we're curious about or tempted with, because that just puts a face to the struggle, and it can also be offensive to our spouse. And so yeah, to say, hey, listen, I had to reset because I was thinking inappropriate about somebody, and I didn't stop it right away. I went with it for a bit. I didn't masturbate to it. I just went with it a bit, and I reported that into my accountability partner, and he or she is helping me through that. I just wanted to be honest with you. And but I wouldn't answer any more details, just that you went to a negative place in your mind. Number 7, how do you balance loving each other in a healthy way and not out of addiction, even though the addiction can look sometimes like healthy love at times? So first of all, you're going to have to reboot this whole love and emotional connection, sexual connection thing after a season of being addicted. And it's important that real love and real connection is other centered. It's not for me. It's a mutual thing. It's both of us. I'm eventually making love to the person, not having sex with the person. And sometimes I have to be careful, because some addicts in the past have used their spouse as part of their sexual addiction. You know, he or she was a receptacle, as it were, of your addiction, and they didn't even know it. But you know it inside, that you're not focusing on them. And so really important that it be other-centered, that it be mutual, that you be focusing on them, that you stay in the moment and present. Number 8, how do you overcome feelings of discontent in the relationship with your spouse, even though you logically want to stay and fight for the relationship? First of all, the logical side has to win. Many times in my life, my head has to tell my heart to shut up. I'll say that again. Many times my head has to tell my emotions, heart, to shut up, because if I lead with just how I feel, like, well, I don't feel like going to work today. Okay, don't go to work today and don't go to work tomorrow because I don't feel like it. I get fired. So I can't go with my feelings. I have to go with what is right and what makes sense. So I need to focus on the reasons why I want to stay in this relationship and let those be reviewed. Now, the discontent, interesting, the famous Dr. Hobart Maurer said this, and I've been quoting it many years now. I really believe strongly in it. He said, it's easier to act your way into the correct feeling than to feel your way into the correct actions. In other words, if you wait till you feel like doing what's right, sometimes you'll wait till hell freezes over. But if you start acting in keeping with your commitment, i.e., these are the reasons why I'm going to do this, your feelings start to come back, especially if you open up your heart and make room for those feelings again. Let me show you something. I'm holding up a piece of paper here, okay? And this piece of paper, you know, would be identified as, well, I don't know why Currie's holding up the piece of paper. But let's just say you sneeze, and while you sneeze, I go like this. I turn it over, and there's now something visible here. And each of you would say, oh my goodness, Dave's holding up a piece of paper with 3 dots on it. We all see them instantly. Our eyes are instantly drawn to the dots. We don't say, oh, why is Dave holding the piece of paper that's 97% white or whatever? We're not saying that. The piece of paper is identified by the dots. Humankind does the same thing. Not only is our eyes drawn to the dots, but actually what happens in this particular struggle here, this is the struggles with my spouse. These are the things that I'm bothered to. And if I keep focusing on those things that are a problem to me, they'll grow bigger. I need to focus on the things that are good and wonderful about the person, not just keep focusing on the things that are wrong. I have to focus on the things that are healthy. Because if every morning I woke up and go, good morning, 3 dot, because you're focusing on the things they're falling short on, versus good morning, 97% amazing. So a lot of it has to do with what you choose to focus on, and be a person of grace, and act your way to the correct feeling instead of feeling your way to the correct action. Number 9, if you struggle with allowing people to love you due to soul wounds, how do you practically change your mindset and allow people to love you? First of all, my heart goes out to this person who's been hurt by others. You naturally have an isolation wall response to protect yourself from other people hurting you. I get that. And so my heart and my challenge would be that you go on the journey to deal with your soul wounds, that you face your soul wounds and process them thoroughly. Because a healthy person is going to be able to receive love and give love. There's joy in giving love, and there's joy in receiving love. And that's that give and take is what God intended for all of us. And when a person goes through hurts where they've been abused or traumatized or violated or taken advantage of, then I'm hesitant to let you into my life. I put up a wall to protect me, even if you are good intentioned. I don't know that. I'm so afraid because of the hurt I've got that this wall is there, and I need to ask God to help me work through the pains. There's another question about this. I'll come back to more detail later, but without a doubt, you need to talk to your counselor and just say, I need you to help me work through my soul wounds so I can receive love clearly. And to be very fair, that's a 4 to 6 session process, not a 2-minute answer in a question time. Very, very important question to ask, though. Number 10, do you have to be open and honest about your relationship with close friends or family in order to have deep relationship? Well, first of all, I would use the idea of there's levels of transparency. And I don't necessarily tell everybody everything. And so I've drawn this knowing I'd answer this question. There's 3 different levels of transparency and disclosure. There's the inner circle, where you might have 2 or 3 people who know everything. There's the outer circle, where the blue is, where they know some of the things. And then there's outside the circle that people are just know that you guys are struggling and you may be separated for a bit. And that's all they know, the outer circle. The outside the circle. The outer circle will know a few more things, that there's some marital issues and, etc. The inner circle knows everything. Notice it's 2 to 3 people in the inner circle. And it's not wise to tell everybody everything, because they may not be mature enough to handle it. But as people feel trustworthy, now the tendency is, well, nobody feels trustworthy, I'm not going to share this with anybody. That's not wise either, because the power of your addiction and shame grows in secret. If you don't break the silence, you don't break the power. So that's why being in groups like ReGroup and Flare are really important, because you become known and people accept you and love you and journey with you and put their arms around you. And it's a healing thing that in of itself. And so, but the more you grow as a person, being more open about your story and your struggles is less threatening, because you realize who you are in Christ and that you're not identified by your past any longer. Number 11, how do you navigate church trauma? Church trauma is really going to be defined as telling your story and someone being hurtful towards you. You mentioned the importance of community, because the opposite of addiction is connection. And it's not isolating in this addiction, yet too often, even more so for the female sex addict, the church community makes it harder to recover, and sometimes even creates more trauma and pain because they don't handle it well, is what I'm assuming. How do you get support and community in the church and even feel like it's okay to speak up about your addiction? How do we maintain recovery without community connections? Because it can't be recovery if you're still alone and isolated. First of all, inherent in this question is great wisdom. The person asking this question has got a lot of things going right. I want to read to you from Galatians chapter 6, verse 1, and it says this: Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught or trapped in a sin, sound familiar? You who are spiritual should restore them gently, but watch out lest yourself be tempted, lest you too will be tempted. You see, what happens is the greater the maturity of the person in their walk with Jesus, the more your issues won't rattle them, because they understand that sin is sin and grace is grace, and that we're all undeserved sinners that need God's grace. And your challenge is maybe unique to them, but grace isn't, and so they can be accepting. So the more mature the person, the more you can be open with them. And remember that you likely have worked through a lot of things before you start maybe sharing your testimony publicly about it. You've worked through some things. You've got people in your corner. You've worked out with your spouse. You're doing well before you would do a public statement like a testimony about God helping you. But you start out by discerning whether or not these people are mature enough to respond properly. But make sure that even if they aren't, and they kind of some kind of judgment or rejection or isolation of you, that it's more about their immaturity and less about you are a person that's under judgment, deserving to be rejected, and should be isolated. It's not that. It's the fact that they are immature yet. And so sometimes that's why the groups that we're in are really important, because you're going to have an opportunity to share openly about your struggles. Matter of fact, in our small group, guys are taking your turn to tell their whole story, to really be honest about everything with the small group of 6. And it's been unbelievably encouraging. The instant response of the rest of the group to whoever shares is, we're behind you. Thanks for being honest. And it was a good context. And so in some cases, you get your healing in a group that's specialized in backing each other through hard times, and then look for mature people inside the church. I was sexually and emotionally abused throughout my childhood. I see how this is one of the root causes of my addiction. How do I overcome this process? For the person who asked this question, I referred to this earlier. There is a process you need to go through to work through your sexual and emotional abuse. I've counseled close to 400 people who were abused as kids, either sexually, well, certainly sexually is what I'm thinking about. And if this person would like to send me an email, I will send you the steps I take people through. And you can look at it and say, okay, I've done this, I've done this, I've done that. Oh, I haven't done these two. Okay. And then you may have some things you may want to work through with your counselor. But there is a really clear process of working through the emotional and sexual abuse, which a lot of times is the root behind it, because we go to a drug of choice, the PMO, the FMO cycle, to just deal with the trauma and try to get some feel-good moments. And so I would just say that for that person, first of all, my heart goes out to you. And secondly, reach out to me in an email, drdave@doingfamilyrant.com, and I will send you that, and you can go from there. Number 13, this is not really a specific question, they say, but I do wonder how to move past shame in the whole purity culture. Well, first of all, I have a talk about moving past shame, so you may want to listen to that. That's a 30-minute answer to your question. The purity culture is getting a bad name sometimes. Matter of fact, I've been thinking about this a lot this week, and I have to be careful because I could give a half-an-hour response to this. But remember, what was behind the purity culture was giving young people guidelines intended to protect them, not as a badge to wear or a badge to lose. And so, I do premarital. Got a book coming out on premarriage here in the next month or two. And I tell people that when they're engaged, I tell them sexually, the more you save till after you're married, the happier you'll be. So don't get involved sexually, because what happens is that sexual ghosts come back to haunt you. You have memories of even other people you've been with before. So the purity culture is actually more about saving my sexuality for the person that I'm going to marry, and is less encumbered, less problematic. And so if you take the opposite of the purity culture, is let people experience it, etc. The problem is I've counseled all those people, not sex addicts, people that have been sleeping around a lot before they're married. And you might say that's maybe a sexual addiction, but it's a selfish thing. It's a experimentalism thing. It's telling people you love them and having sex with them and then breaking up with them, 3 months later. Meantime, you were sexual with them half a dozen times, and you have repeat. Well, that person isn't in a position to really learn to be faithful in their marriage, because they haven't learned to be faithful in their relationships. And so, so keep that in mind. Listen to the one on shame. Number 14, we've heard you say, don't let the dark days define you. When an addict shares openly about their addiction, well-meaning people can make inaccurate assumptions about the recovering person. This reinforces the belief that the addict is defined by his or her dark days. How do you overcome this? Remember, well-meaning people are often immature people, right? And so remember, you have to realize that who God sees me is what really is important, not the immature person making a judgment about me that I maybe risk telling honestly, right? And so who I am in God's eyes, how God sees me, that I'm forgiven, that I am a much loved child of God on my journey to freedom by the help of God and my brothers and sisters here. And so remember, the dark days define us when we allow them to continue to sink us, versus I got to remember who I am in Christ. I got to continue to do the program and become a man or woman of integrity and purity. And I, more and more days of honoring Jesus and living in purity, my past doesn't have to define me. Many people on this call, even this morning, have a wonderful past that's been explored and dealt with in an honest way. And a beautiful recovery story is taking place. And number 15, when we become fully known, the fear is that we will not be loved. Okay, beautiful insight there. It's hard to lean into being fully known because of the negative stereotype that often comes from being a female lover, sex addict. How should we process this fear? Well, again, it comes back to mature people, safer people who love you unconditionally, which is what we try to model here in the recovery groups with DFR. And so, first of all, to be known and still loved is one of the greatest experiences in humankind. Donna Lynn knows me, everything about me, my shortcomings and everything, and she sees them more than any of you do, and she still loves me. And I see the occasional thing that she messes up with, and I can offer grace because there aren't many. But to be known and still loved is a beautiful gift. And one of the best things I think to do for you is make sure that you're a person who loves and accepts people unconditionally, so they don't feel afraid to be loved by you. But it's hard to move past the fear when we feel that there's been rejection in the past. And so, yeah, God bless you in the journey. Make sure you're authentic in the small groups here, in your recovery groups. Make sure you're being honest, because this is the place where you test pilot being honest. You tell your story. You know, matter of fact, the darkest part of your story, it's best to tell honestly, because remember, power, the enemy's power over it, grows in secret. And I don't want that power over me, that grip over me. So I'm going to tell all and be accepted and accept God's forgiveness for it all. Number 16 out of 20, when the addict stops giving in to their sexual love addiction, other addictions often surface in their addictive cycle. How do you suggest managing this? Well, you have to understand the addictive push. And usually it is about the soul wounds and what's the nature to medicate in some way, to get distracted in some way. And so there needs to be ongoing healing from all aspects that have driven me towards my original addiction. Because I mean, a person I worked with, maybe quit sexually acting out, but started going to the casino and was blowing a bunch of money in the addictive mindset. Some people slide away from this addiction and get into drinking, and they're drinking every night. And of course, we're just trying to medicate the pain in a different way. So it's not wise to exchange one addiction for another. We have to get what's behind the addiction cycle and what's behind that push. Do the healing work. Be accountable, and watch yourself that you're not just sliding away from a sexual or love addiction to some other addiction. Dangerous thing to do, and again, likely best to work with a counselor. Women don't tend to talk about their sexual or love addiction struggles with other women. It's not the social norm. As a result, isolation and struggling alone is common. How would you suggest the female addict to connect in an authentic and honest way with others? That's why we have these recovery groups. In particular, I encouraged Olivia, who's leading the Flare group. So proud of her. we got to create a place that's safe for women who struggle with love addiction or sexual addiction, where you can risk and you can be an authentic, safe place yourself, so that other people will feel safe with you, that you will be one who operates in grace and doesn't judge, but comes alongside others. So you model it to create an example, and then you yourself start in places where you feel these people are mature enough. And it is a process. It is hard, but I commend you to that journey of risking and but also model acceptance yourself. Number 18, I understand that it's the addict's responsibility to take complete ownership of the addiction to rebuild the marriage. But at what point in recovery is it fair to request that my husband or my spouse start working on his or her emotional or physically abusive behaviors? How would you suggest approaching this? My first thought was, ask this question in front of your therapist, right? You see, I would accept that the sexual addiction or the love addiction is certainly one of the major problems that need to be dealt with, but it's not the only problem. And too often the partner is seeing it, well, that's the problem. And anytime there's any implication, well, what about this? Well, yeah, but you this, and this is the big thing. So, you don't have a right to tell me anything. Well, that's foolish as well. So what I like to do is I like to, when I'm working with couples, I put on the whiteboard, yes, we got to deal with the sexual addiction, the love addiction, the PMO cycle that's crippling the relationship. So let that be number one. But what is number two? What is number three? What is number four? What are the other things that we need to do with to get a healthy marriage? Because too often people that have struggled with addiction of some sort, there are other compounding factors that do influence the relationship. Maybe you're lousy at resolving conflict with each other. Maybe you're lousy at showing love to each other. And just, a relational love, connection love, emotional connection, things like that. So yes, number one might be dealing with the addiction and the hurt that I carry because of my spouse's addiction. But number 2, 3, and 4 are still there to be worked with. And we need to just make sure we know what's on the list to deal with. 19. When you're being sexually intimate with your partner, in this case, your husband, for this woman, I have sometimes intrusive thoughts and images in my mind, and I've been tempted to fantasize. What would you suggest to keep a pure mind during sexual intimacy? And listen, this isn't just a struggle with this woman asking. This is many of the men I've worked with as well, is they're trying to come out of the addiction. They're being sexually with your wife because they've been so used to going to fantasies in their mind, even though they're being sexually with their wife. And so some of the things that are wise, first of all, pray before you're going to have a night of intimacy. If you're going to be into that night, Jesus, would you help me stay in the moment? And then stay in the moment, stay present. And matter of fact, even be praying internally, God, keep me present, keep me here. And so it helps to have some lights on so you can see the other person, that you keep your eyes open and you focus on your spouse as you're growing in your intimacy, especially during an orgasm, that you're actually focused on your spouse. You're not just in your own world someplace. So stay in the moment, be praying before, whisper prayers to yourself. God, keep me here, keep me loving well, help me to love well, Lord. And then eyes open, lights on, focus on your spouse, and then move on from there. And number 20, I've heard two extremes. On one side, this likely is a single person asking this question, single female, of course. I've heard two extremes. On one side, there's no kissing before you're engaged. On the other side, do everything but intercourse, and that's okay prior to marriage. What is the appropriate sexual boundary prior to marriage? All right. I've answered this question scores of times, and so I'm going to give you hopefully a good answer. First of all, what's the line is you need to stop whatever you're doing before you get cranked sexually, before you start getting aroused sexually. And so too often when people ask me the question, well, where do I draw the line? When I tell them where the line is, then they kind of go to the line all the time and they fall past the line over and over. And I would say that we need to change the question, not how far can I go before I'm married? What's the appropriate sexual boundary? Even though this is a good question, I think we need to reframe the question. It's not how far can I go, but how pure I can stay. Remember, the more you save till after your marriage, the happier you'll be. And so you want to be really specific. Don't do anything that's going to get you cranked sexually. Keep the clothes on, keep the pants buckled up, no zippers being undone, no buttons undone, because that's all about being sexual. Got it? It's all being sexual. And so if you're dating someone, you can't, if you're having a good night kiss and hug session, and no sexual petting, no sexual arousal, because that can't be fully intended, because this may not be my spouse. And even when you're engaged, you say, well, now that I'm engaged, I should be able to enjoy all this stuff because we are getting married. I say, okay, but here's what you're learning. You're learning the value of self-control. You're learning the value of saying no. Because down the road, once you're married 5-10 years, there will be temptations that come, and you have to have had the strength to say no along the way. So it's a good time to practice keeping those kind of boundaries. I am so stinking proud of the questions that you guys have coming my way. Seriously. Just, I feel honored to be the one to answer your questions, whether it's the men in recovery or the women in recovery or the partners in recovery. And there's so much for us to learn from one another's questions. Matter of fact, the only dumb question is the one you don't ask, because invariably when someone asks the question, someone else in the group is going, oh, I'm glad someone asked that. I've thought that question too. And so stay with the journey, keep asking good questions, and keep working to get answers for your questions, to become the man, to become the woman God wants you to be, a person who's, yes, on your way to freedom by the help of God. God bless you. Thanks for your questions. And let's go to our discussion now.